Good evening there, everybody. What is happening? Hopefully, you all are having a wonderful day today. So, when it comes down to it, I thought that I would talk about this little topic that I found very particularly interesting. And of course, this is going to be the topic on the Brian Castano versus Jermell Charlo situation. And I've already talked about this a few times. Of course, this fight was supposed to happen, I believe, sometime within, February. Of course, we're actually now almost completely done with the month of February. So, of course, the fight is not happening then. It ended up getting postponed once. I don't necessarily remember why. But overall, it was supposed to happen in the month of March, which of course is that of next month. And now apparently the fight once again is going to be postponed once more. Or maybe if it's going to be postponed, and from what I hear, it is being postponed because Mr. Brian Castano at least allegedly has an injury or suffered an injury and not a training camp. Do I believe all in all that he suffered an injury? I believe that more than likely that he did suffer an injury. And of course, there is going to be a lot of narratives out there, debatably, that that Brian Castano maybe is avoiding him and yada 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 yada, and that he's doing the same thing that Tony Harrison did, and that this is a sign that he's scared of him. What I'll say is this: in my view, I don't think that Brian Castano. I'm not going to allege that he's avoiding that of Jermell Charlo, and the reason why is because I'm not just a person all in all that alleges that someone is avoiding someone, unless I think all in all that there's somewhat of strong evidence or very strong intuition pointing in that direction. So I'm not really going to allege that either Jermell Charlo or Brian Castano are avoiding each other. Now, of course, in this situation, you can't really allege overall that Jermell Charlo would be avoiding him whatsoever. It only, maybe you could allege it with Brian Castano. But I believe that more than likely that Brian Castano did suffer an injury to his bicep. Apparently, that is what happened, whether in a sparring match or in training camp, whatever it may be. Apparently, he ended up suffering a slightly torn bicep tear when it comes down to it, or a slight bicep tear. We'll see all in all how quickly he can recover from this. And I do think all in all that this is very unfortunate, of course, for boxing fans and a certain amount of other people out there, because this was one of the bigger fights out there. But just to talk about it real quick when it comes down to it, and apparently overall in other news, if this fight, does get postponed to the point to where they overall have to face their mandatories and they can no longer do the unification fight. Apparently, there's news that Jermell Charlo that he may have to face a mandatory, which may be Erickson Lubin from what I've heard, which is a decent fight. I just don't see it as a great fight. And you also have Brian Castano against Tim Tszyu, which once again I think is a decent fight, but I don't really think it's a great fight. In my opinion, in a way, I do think that this fight is a great fight. But in another way, I wouldn't really say that it's as great as some of the other fights out there. And I know a lot of people are going to take a look at me and say, oh, wow, what the hell do you mean by that? And I'm not trying to be a party pooper or anything like that. I do think that this match for both Jermell Charlo and Brian Castano, I do think that it's very interesting for their standards. And the reason why that is because, and I said this even when the first fight all in all was happening, I don't think that any other fighter out there is going to give them as much trouble, at least within that weight division, as each other. And Brian Castano and Jermell Charlo proved me 100% correct in that first fight. The only thing is, when it comes down to it, is that when I take a look at Brian Castano versus Jermell Charlo, this unification fight would almost somewhat remind me of that of Devin Haney versus George Kambosos. What do I necessarily mean by that? I think that it would be a great unification fight, but they're not two fighters that when I really take a look at them that I say, wow, these two fighters are really the creme de la creme. When I take a look at Jermell Charlo and Brian Castano, there's of course a lot of heat being propped up about this fight and saying overall, oh man, we got to see the supremacy in the very deep division. Well, in all reality, and once again, this is not me trying to downplay the fight, but besides Brian Castano and Jermell Charlo, who really is there at the 154-pound division that we can really claim that is elite? Who really can we say overall that is there right now or in their prime that we can really claim, wow, that dude is a real A-class fighter? I mean, really no one besides that of, Jermell Charlo and Brian Castano. That's why that fight is so particularly interesting. But that's why, when certain people, they've asked me in the past, well, where do you rank overall, the winner of this fight? I would say that the winner of this, unification match, that they would have a chance to just make my top 10 pound per pound list. You could certainly argue that because, of course, the unified division and, whoever wins this fight, they will claim that, overall that they do have a win over an official A-grade fighter. But the problem is that I just don't think that there's any other legitimate A-grade wins on their career. When you take a look at Jermell Charlo, and you have certain people like Dante's Boxing Nation channel, for example, he says, oh, 154 is really one of the deepest divisions out there. Well, is 154 really one of the one of the deepest divisions out there? I mean, if we really take a look at that division, who really is there? I mean, sure, you have Jermell Charlo and Brian Castano, and both of those fighters are extremely gifted. Both of those fighters are very decent. They're also somewhat flawed. It just is what it is. Then you also have Jason Rosario, I believe, Julian J. Rock Williams, who has a chin made out of wet tissue paper. It just is what it is, and already has a few losses in his record. You know, you had Jarrett Hurd, who pretty much was just a straightforward come straight at you fighter who pretty much was a weight bully. And then once he finally overall faced a fighter that could handle his size and his skill set, he pretty much got dominated. You have Erickson Lubin, who is somewhat talented, but not really someone that I would classify as an A-grade fighter. The thing is who really is there besides these two when it comes down to it, that in my opinion, they really are just that elite. And in my opinion, I don't think all in all that you can really claim when it comes down to it that either of these fighters are really A-plus fighters. For example, let me just put it this way. If you were to have these two fighters overall, let's say peak v peak, if you were to have them face a Gennady Triple G Golovkin overall and Araceli Lara at their peak, or overall a Canelo Alvarez, do I believe that Jermell Charlo or Brian Castano beats either of those fighters or any of those fighters at their peak and at their best? No. Now, of course, Brian Castano, he did end up getting a draw against Araceli Lara a few years back, but that also was a Lara that was starting to be a little bit on the decline in terms of strategy, in terms of his legs when it came down to it, and in terms of age. And Araceli Lara was even able to give Brian Castano more trouble, in my opinion, than what Jermell Charlo was. And the reason why that is because Araceli Lara, and I've been saying this for many, many years, Araceli Lara is more talented than either Charlo brother ever has been and ever will be. It just is what it is. Araceli Lara at his peak and prime was smarter. All in all, he was better with his feet. He overall was a better mover. He was better defensively responsible. He was better in almost every single category besides maybe punching power. It just is what it is. He probably did not have the natural punching power of either of those fighters. But this is what I'm saying. It's not that this is not a good fight, and this is not me trying to say, oh, just this fight sucks. That's not what I'm trying to do. But this is why, all in all, when I talk about this fight, I don't necessarily rank it as high in higher regard as maybe some of the other fights out there. The reason why that is because I think that this is a great unification fight. I think that it's very great for both of them. But in terms of my pound-for-pound ranking, who necessarily would I put, if you're asking me, would I put either of these fighters, whoever were to win this fight, on the top 5 pound-for-pound spot? No. No, I wouldn't. Because I think that once either Brian Castano or once Jermell Charlo, I think that once they either meet Terrence Bud Crawford or Errol Spence Jr., I think they're going to have a very rude awakening. But I could be wrong. We'll see all in all what happens. But anyways, that's really about it for this fight. But that's overall for this video. Thank you so much for watching, and I'll talk to you all later.